In this video, I'll be shortly going over my first impressions of this little fella right here, the Sony A7CR. I mainly got this for the same reasons as other people, the small form factor and the weight. I did initially have some worries with some of the differences between the A7CR that I read about online compared to the bigger bodies. But as I mentioned later in this video, some of them weren't as bad in my opinion as others made them out to be. Then after that, I'll be showing just a couple of clips from various photo walks that I've done in the past couple of weeks, some of them including the usage of the Sony A7CR. Anyways, with this video's format, I'll first talk about the positives about the A7CR, the surprisingly positive features of the A7CR that I found out when using it, which were, worrisome for me at first, and then finally the negatives of the camera. So let's get to it. So the first point I want to talk about is the weight. So this is pretty self-explanatory, so I don't really think I have to go too much in depth about this, this topic or this section right here. It's basically, if you're comparing the C series camera to their A7 counterparts, the bigger body counterparts, they're just smaller and they're lighter. That's just a fact. So they're naturally, gonna be lighter. And we can honestly just move on to the next point from here. The second point I wanted to quickly talk about in this positives category is the ability to crop, basically the same thing as the A7R5. They're both 61 megapixel cameras, so if you ever need a crop and need to have that extra, oomph, maybe you're too far away, you don't have the gear, you didn't bring your long lens that day, you didn't bring your telephoto lens, then you can simply just crop and you'll have enough megapixels still to be able to get a pretty high quality image. And personally for me, because I do have the A7R5 as well as my main camera, having both cameras being able to basically do the same thing, because they're basically the same cameras, just the A7CR has, some features that the A7R5 doesn't have, which I'll be talking about later. But they're basically the same cameras, just one being smaller. And the A7R5 obviously, having its own positive as well. But yeah, having both cameras being able to do the exact same thing, photography and videography wise, just makes it much easier in my opinion to, in case one of them gets downed, the other body is available for me to use and I won't be losing any type of function. And this is as opposed to my previous setup where I had the A7R5 and the A7 IV. With the A7 IV, the bodies were very similar, so I ended up just using my A7R5 99% of the time, whereas my A7 IV was really only used for these talking head videos, and I never really got to use it for photography because again, I ended up just choosing the A7R5 because it's just the superior camera in my opinion, and I ended up just using it because there's no loss. The bodies are very similar. There's a bit of a difference, but I mean, weight-wise, form factor-wise, they're pretty much the same thing in my opinion. So I ended up just choosing the A7R5 to shoot with, a lot of the time. So yeah, with this camera, because it is a different experience to shoot with compared to the A7R5, I do like that ability of getting that different shooting experience while at the same time retaining the same features. And again, that interchangeability as well. If one of them goes down, then, I don't lose any type of functionality and I can still continue to do photography while the other body is being fixed. So that's something that I appreciate about the A7CR. So moving on to the next category, the surprisingly positive features that I found out about the A7CR when using it. And the first thing is that the lack of a joystick wasn't actually an issue with me. So that's something that I really thought I'd be worried about because, I use the joystick a lot. I use the small focus point where I really want to be able to precisely pinpoint my focus. That I use my area. I sometimes use the area focus, but that sometimes in itself have a doesn't really something else in front. So I really use the pinpoint small focus point. Basically, I can pinpoint my focus. So the joystick, I thought would be a problem, or not having a joystick would be a problem, but it wasn't, because instead of the joystick, how you would actually just, kind of move around the screen, you use these wheels right here. So your little directional wheels, you just go right for right, left for left, and so on and so forth. Yeah, the lack of a joystick wasn't a problem. What I am worried about though, in terms of the longevity of this, is the longevity and the lifespan of the wheel directional, portion of the A7CR, because when I was using my A7 III, I must have been using the directional pad so many times because it kind of wore out on that camera. So at a certain point, the directionals on the wheel pad or the wheel scroll, whatever you call it, they weren't really as bouncy and as responsive. If you click right or click left, you can feel that it's going down. My A7 III did not have that feel. It still worked, but you just didn't have that kind of like click. So I am worried about the longevity of that for this camera, and we'll see what happens in a year or two. But for now, yeah, the lack of a joystick is not a problem in my opinion. So the second surprisingly positive feature, or this thing that I found about the A7CR, is I had no issues with the handling or the ergonomics of the smaller form factor of the camera. A lot of people's comments that I've read online were saying that it just doesn't feel as comfortable as, you know, the bigger bodies, and people were just saying it wasn't as comfortable of an experience with this camera. But honestly, in my opinion, I really like the small form factor and the ergonomics of this camera. Having the base plate not be there doesn't really bother me. You know, we all have different opinions of ergonomics and comfortability for a camera, you know, different hand sizes and such, but personally for me, yeah, I don't find it a problem. I honestly just like carrying it with like one hand just like this and, you know, shooting around like that. So I really like the way my hand feels when I shoot with this camera. It's just really comfortable in my opinion. And even with like long periods of me, you know, using this camera, like I find this super comfortable. It's just a joy to shoot with. So yeah, not an issue. Also, one thing that I wanted to talk about as well with in relation to the ergonomics and the small form factor and also the weight of this camera is that when I purchased the A7CR, I originally thought that I was just gonna be using it for like, you know, mainly with small lenses because, you know, I wanted the ultimate small, you know, form factor, right? Whereas the bigger lenses, like what bigger lenses, because the 24-70 isn't really a big lens. I thought I was gonna use those type of lenses on my A7R5, not exclusively, but you know, most of the time. But honestly, comboing the A7CR with the 24-70 GM2 has become one of my favorite like pairs for me. The 24-70 GM2 used to mainly be, you know, a travel lens for me where I would only use it, you know, for when I'm traveling. Whereas, you know, during my time in LA here, I would just use primes because it just, I don't know, something that I just got used to. But over the past couple of outings, I've gone to Venice Beach and Santa Monica for photo walks with my 24-70 GM2 along with this, you know, A7CR. And I've really been loving the combo. It's really comfortable, and even though the A7CR is not like super lighter than the A7R5, it's not like, you know, it's like half the weight off, right? It's only, I believe 200 grams or so lighter. But I don't know, this combo feels way lighter and way easier to use than the 24-70 A7R5. Like, I don't understand why. It just feels really light and easy to like hold. So that just makes me want to take more pictures, honestly, with it. So yeah, this combo has been a very, very unexpected but nice combo to use. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. So now moving on to the negatives of the camera. The negatives that I've personally found out from using this camera, as well as, you know, the things that I've read online and then can confirm again after using this camera. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the viewfinder resolution. So this is something that's been a pretty hot topic since this camera came out. So a little backstory in case you aren't familiar with it. Compared to the A7R5, you know, basically the bigger brother of this camera body, it's basically shit. The viewfinder is basically shit compared to that camera. So this camera is basically the same resolution as the A7 III. I forgot the exact numbers, but it was around like 2.36 million dots. I really don't pay attention to the, you know, the numbers. That's just kind of confusing for me. So you can probably look that up online, but yeah, it's roughly the same as the A7 III, and it's actually less resolution, yeah, just less quality compared to the A7 IV. Compared to cameras in its price range, yes, it does suck that, you know, it isn't higher and that we can't at least get the same resolution as the A7R5 or hell, even the A7 IV. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things, when using, you know, the camera out in the field, like, I don't find it getting in the way of my photography at all. Like, I can still see through the viewfinder clearly when I need to. And it's not like, you know, it looks like, you know, super grainy or anything like that. Like, I can still get great photos and I can still see clearly. Like, it's not a deal breaker or anything like that. So yeah, honestly, it's a negative because, I mean, you know, compared to the A7R5, it is shit. But yeah, I can still take pictures like perfectly fine, and it's, you know, it still works. So yeah, I don't really have any complaints unless I were to compare. Not comparing anything is perfectly fine. So there's that. So the second negative I wanted to mention is the lack of buttons. So this is really a give and take with the smaller form factor in the way, obviously, because, you know, they took out a lot of the body. So you obviously can't put more buttons, or at least the same amount of buttons as the A7R5. I don't, you know about the manufacturer of cameras and stuff like that, so I can't really say, you know, whether they could add the same amount of buttons or not, but I mean, you know, they cut a portion of the camera out, so I'm assuming they had to take some stuff out. That's just my opinion, I don't know. Don't kill me if I'm wrong, but that's that, right? That's just my thought. I wanted to get the buttons and the controls like super similar to my A7R5. So that way when I'm interchanging cameras, you know, just when I'm traveling or, you know, just if I want to use another camera over the other. Like if I wanted to use my A7R5 over my A7CR or vice versa, then I wouldn't have any trouble of, you know, having to remember, oh, like the button is different for this camera. What do I have to do to get there again? So yeah, and to avoid that, I just made them very similar to each other in terms of the button mapping and stuff like that. Because the A7CR does have less buttons than the A7R5, I did have to switch up and leave out a couple of buttons here and there when it comes to, you know, the shortcuts and the button mapping. But again, since this is due to the smaller form factor, I'm assuming, you know, it's just a trade-off that I gotta deal with. So it's not too much of a negative when you think about it like that, but it is a negative because you do lose buttons. So there's that. So the last negative I wanted to talk about was the max shutter speed. So comparing this camera to the A7R5, which max shutter speed is 1/8,000th of a second, the A7CR's max shutter speed is only 1/4,000th of a second. So, you know, overall, it sucks that you can't get that extra, you know, like oomph when you might need it. For example, you know, when you want to freeze the motion of a really fast action or, you know, animal or whatever. But honestly, looking back at my Lightroom catalog, I've rarely ever had to take a picture of something over 1/4,000th of a second. And the pictures that I did have over 1/4,000th of a second, like they didn't really need to be shot with that shutter speed. So in reality, like for me personally, I don't need it. So it's not really a negative for me. Though one thing I will say, it does suck sometimes when I'm shooting in aperture priority, which is the main mode that I shoot in. And you know, it randomly gets bright due to the sun and, you know, me coming out from somewhere dark, like, you know, a market or something like that. And my shutter speed drastically changes all of a sudden. And, you know, if I see something interesting at that split moment, albeit, you know, that's a very rare occurrence, but, you know, it does happen sometimes. And, you know, during those moments, you might, you know, take something, and because the exposure suddenly changes or your shutter speed suddenly changes, your exposure might come out, you know, just super overexposed because of that lack of ability of the camera to reach, you know, over 1/4,000th of a second. So those moments do happen, but very rarely. If you just pay attention, honestly, to your camera and your settings, those honestly should be pretty avoidable as well. So it's not a deal breaker or anything like that. So, I mean, it is a negative, but it's, again, something that I can live without. So in summary, this camera has been an absolute joy to use, and I finally feel like with the A7CR and the A7R5, I have the perfect two cameras for me. With each camera having a specific usage when I'm out taking photos, as well as also just, you know, being pretty interchangeable. So in case one camera malfunctions, you know, for some odd reason, knock on wood, there's no wood around me so I can't knock, but knock on wood for me, please. In case, you know, a camera malfunctions, I still have the backup available between, you know, either camera, so I can continue taking photos if I'm either traveling or even if I'm just in LA, you know, like in case one body's in the camera shop, I can still have the other body with the same functions that I can go out and take photos. So yeah. Anyways, that's all for this video. I hope you enjoyed and were able to get a better idea if the Sony A7CR is a camera for you, and if it's something you'd want in your kit. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Later.
Chance the Hooper gives it over to Chima. Chima with the dribble. Chima gets the three. Chima throws it inside. Miss. Loses the ball. Oh!
good, you're good.